Horror is a complicated genre due to its ever-changing nature. Frankenstein from 1931 comes to my mind as that movie nearly 100 years ago was terrifying, but nowadays it's just funny at times but mostly boring. A constant in the genre has been violence, and sometimes extreme violence, though some things like The Terrifier make the mistake of believing that this violence is all you need to make a scary experience, when really it just makes it hard to watch. Prettyblood's within that category of horror, and the only thing this show can do is gross out those who watch it. This isn't its only failure either, as at times it tries to be comedic or give us meaningful characters, but every time it falls flat in its face, and the only consistent thing with this series is that it always fails at its attempt at being horrific. Overview plus credits. I want to start off with an overview and general credits since unlike Terrible Mouse, there isn't any clear direct serialized storyline. Little Deadly Things started Prettyblood on Newgrounds in 2017, and it continues to this day as an occasionally serialized story through arcs that follow different characters, though the world's always the exact same. This review intends to analyze what's certainly canon to Prettyblood as opposed to just random stuff the creator makes. I'll be going with Red Snow, Bunchy Prison, other stuff like Space Blubby and Dream Terror, and finally technical. Credits wise, I want to praise LDT for him improving in every way as his videos continue. His English, storytelling, animation, timing, whether horror or comedic, all get noticeably better as time passes, and I want to give him his dues for not stagnating. It's also very impressive that he makes a lot of the music for Prettyblood, be that for Red Snow, technical, or really anything else, with one of my favorites by him being Whispers, which I'll probably use in the video at some point. With other credits, I'll give them throughout this video when they feel appropriate since a lot of them are specific, but outside of rare great moments, generally Prettyblood is a boring, confusing, disgustingly and obviously fetishistic series that tries to be more than it is. Now I know that the accusation of this being a fetish series sounds harsh, but I want you to understand where I'm coming from. Prettyblood is a fetish show. I believe there are two markers you have to note and look for if you believe a show is fetish based. One is how much does the presumed fetish appear in the story, and two, does it serve any narrative purpose? A solid example of this is Porkchop and Flat Screen. I assume that the characters being hit in the genitals is a fetish because it happens at least twice in every episode. Most of the jokes relate to exactly that, and joke-wise he's been doing it for over a decade, so even if it was funny initially, the joke has been reused so many times that it doesn't make any sense, because by episode 3 we get it. Prettyblood falls into this category and then some, as Rinny always tortures adults and children in creative though consistent ways. Storyline wise, we only need to see her doing this once for a little while, and then imply that it's happening off screen to understand the horror of what she's doing. But if there's a torture scene, we always see it even though we don't need to. Plus, the exact same effect could have been done by showing that Rinny ties people up in her basement, and then showing that she tortures them with a knife, for example. Rinny also always uses weird, complex machines like the Butt Slapper 9000 used on Elma, which is also used on some other rabbit character before Red Snow. A lot of these scenes last for a very long time too. I mean, the Bloon and Copper suffocation scene lasts for a straight up minute, and it has some of the most expressive animation and best sound design. Scenes like this heavily bog down the show pacing wise for no good reason, since they're not scary and overall, they change nothing. Again, in that Copper and Bloon scene, they're supposed to die, but the same thing could have been more shocking if Rinny just blew both their heads off. Because of this, it's clear to me that the author is using Rinny to live out his odd fetish, and what cements this fully is that Rinny herself has a fetish for torturing people. This isn't necessary since what Rinny is doing is already disturbing enough, and it could have worked the exact same way or been more disturbing if we didn't know why she was doing it. And even if you wanted to keep her having this fetish, you could decide to not joke about it so much, as if it's something normal, or not to also give other characters the same inclination. To prove my assumption with a little evidence, according to this video that a person in my Terrible Mouse comment section made, the guy clearly created freaking material to enjoy that's not even YouTube friendly. They'll take this with a grain of salt. And of course, with the recent drama, we all know that this is 100% true. Good job BP Productions for calling this out early, a year early by the way, which is kind of crazy. Good job, dude. This is the biggest problem with the show because it happens so often that you'll eventually be desensitized to it, and any possible horror or gross out feelings you'd have dissipates. The way the show fails is someone succeeds when it comes to the art style and audio design. It's clear by the art style that LDT took inspiration from Happy Tree Friends. As like that show, this one pulls a rug from under you with its violence. In that way, despite all the warnings, it succeeds, but it doesn't stay within that lane. The author often tries to draw very creepy or detailed faces on characters, which usually ends up looking extremely funny because it's so aggressively unfitting. Like whenever Rinny switches from her cute cartoony face to freaky detailed man face, while nothing else about her changes. This is because it's too detailed for the art style. The creator did it well in Elma's Red Snow special with Yulu by giving her face enough detail to be disturbing, but not so much that it feels like he's pushing it for the sake of comedy. I think that this is a big issue too because the author, especially in older stuff like Necroworms or Technical, just couldn't draw things outside of their super overly simplistic art style, making me believe that this wasn't the style that was chosen for this, but instead it was just how the creator always drew. Audio wise, Prettyblood is solid, especially later on with smart audio decision like the silent jump scare Elma did to Yulu, which signifies that she's still a threat, but due to her weakened condition, the threat is quite literally muted. And also specific moments like when Luny was shot with a crossbow, though it still falls flat at times. First, the screams, which are reused and have been for an extremely long time. To me, like Terrible Mouse, it starts becoming more funny than actually scene enhancing. The audio balancing, microphone quality, and voice acting throughout the whole series is just too bad to not note as well.
What are you looking at, you murderer? Stop hiding and fighting a man, you coward!
I don't like being harsh about this since voice acting is hard, but everyone's voice for some reason is the same, even for the military vet Kim. Generally though, both of these aspects are serviceable, and I understand each decision made auditorially and even art style wise, but what I don't understand is the confusing storytelling. Prettyblood's told in a weird way as a lot of episodes just aren't canon or available on YouTube, and though on Newgrounds they're all available, there's no specific playlist to watch for what is and isn't canon. This makes it difficult when newly coming in to understand the continuity of the series and what is important and what isn't important for later, since it's impossible to know for sure by just checking LDT's playlist or seeing episode titles. Was 2017's Dream Terror necessary or canon? Are all of his deleted episodes still canon? Or will Technical be important for understanding things that'll happen way later? And is that a side story, or is Redstone a side story despite having Rinny? Is there even a canon or just sub-stories? I'm sure I could search across the web for hours and eventually find a forum of little deadly things saying what is and what isn't canon or something, but this should just be clear and obvious whenever you watch any web series. This is why I decided to simply focus on Red Snow, Bunchy Prison, Technical, and a few of the other animations. Specifics. It's hard to talk about Prettyblood in a general sense since due to its nature, a lot of it has completely different issues. This is why I'll be breaking down what works and what doesn't in Prettyblood's presumably canon arcs. We'll be starting with Red Snow. This is by far Prettyblood's most popular arc due to its characterization, plot, and action at the end. Because of this, I think it makes the most sense to tackle this first, and since I already analyzed the art style and audio, I'll be breaking down what aspects Red Snow gets right and wrong, then the characters, and I'll analyze 2 of the best episodes and 2 of the worst. Stupid world building plus plot. Believable world building in all stories is important and extremely important in serious ones because if we can't believe that the world makes sense, we'd have lingering questions on how it functions, and we can't believe anything that happens in that world makes sense. A similar example genre-wise, that being the game Fear and Hunger, does this well by establishing the dungeon's deadliness and mystery, and you slowly learn more and more things as you go deeper into it. Plus, given the medieval time period, nothing super insane or unbelievable happens, like a monster coming out with an AK-47 or something to kill the main characters, since it stays grounded within everything that it set up. The medieval monster pulling out an AK problem is what Prettyblood faces though. In episode 1, for no reason, Rinny just has a UFO, and even though aliens exist as we see in Space Blubby, Rinny never steals a UFO or something. She just has one for no reason, and technology like this just isn't anywhere else to be seen. There's a part where Rinny says that she bought the UFO, but this is also confusing because why didn't anyone else in the Prettyblood organization also buy a UFO? Everything else in this world technology-wise is shown to be relative to ours, like how Rinny's allies use regular modern military-grade gear and they fly a helicopter. This and a lot of other things surrounding Rinny make the world less believable and more confusing, which I'll talk more about in her specific character arc, but one thing that's extremely confusing is when this takes place. This arc was created a little while after Technical, and in Technical, the entire Prettyblood company was destroyed. But I guess that wasn't really canon or something, because Rinny can just call backup from that very company to help her. The entire nebulous company aspect of this also makes no sense, because why is Rinny just freely allowed to use their assets while giving nothing to the company? The secrecy of this area is also confusing since this house isn't really in the middle of nowhere. Yulu in the Elma special arc is literally walking in the direction of this house, which means that it's fully possible for people to eventually find this place, and since corpses are on all the trees, all someone has to do is see this place from afar and it'd be over. Though since most things have to do with Rinny, I think it'd make more sense to talk about the small issues plus plot contrivances. No story is perfect and they all have small issues, though they're small since they tend not to ruin your experience. It might seem odd, but Rick and Morty comes up as a good example of this, because how is it that our Rick is always the smartest and strongest whenever he fights other Ricks, even though all his other versions are basically 100% identical to him and have the same abilities? It's obviously just plot convenience, so scenes with Rick fighting other versions of himself don't end up with him getting immediately owned, but it's only small because Rick and Morty is mostly a comedy and its other aspects make up for this tiny shortcoming. Like Terrible Mouse, Red Snow isn't good enough to ignore its small issues, so you may be asking about things like why Bloon doesn't act on his own opinions, even though nothing directly shows that he's against violence or doing so. Why'd Copper ruin the lie? How can Bloon forget about him feeling unsafe when Rinny's not in his sight even though he's smart? There are other dumb small issues that I'll get into later, but what I also see as an issue is the fact that quite a few characters have powers for no reason. They're confusing because they're both not explained, and some characters have them while others don't. And it's bad because it's weird for them to have these powers in what would usually be a grounded survival horror setting. Copper, Elma, and Carl have powers, but Rinny, Luny, and Bloon don't. And it also makes me wonder if Rinny, Luny, and Bloon do have powers and we're just hiding it, since for the most part, characters like Copper and Carl's powers add nothing to the story. Carl uses his power to make little traps with Copper's electricity, but they don't do much aside from distracting Rinny so Carl can drop down on her. But even then, he could have just hid behind the door and that could have accomplished the exact same effect. It feels more like plot contrivance than anything, which is honestly one of Red Snow's biggest problems. This arc is written in a way where we can tell that the author really wanted some specific events to happen, but couldn't think of how they could happen naturally, so they forced it. Carl's death with Elma jumping out of the cupboard is a good example, since why would she be in there, given her previous behavior and the fact that she clearly hasn't calmed down? She's just not in the same mental state as she was in episode 2 when she was hiding in the drawer. It also makes no sense because this means that she walked past Bloon and Copper's dead bodies without freaking out to then hide. I'll take two other examples that were really big so you can see my point better, one being the dry firing scene with Carl and Rinny because it didn't make sense. There's no reason for Rinny to carry around an empty shotgun, and by her face when Carl dry fires, it seems as if she expected for someone to take it and try to use it on her. Why would she expect this? And if she didn't have any more ammo after what she did to Bloon and Copper, she could have just used her pistol. That's effectively the same thing, and it takes less space. The second other example is Rinny getting the crossbow. It doesn't make sense and leads to one of three possible things. One, while Luny was in that room searching for things to torture Rinny with, she didn't notice a crossbow the size of her head. If this was true, Luny would have to be either absurdly dumb or blind, but those aren't traits that she was established to have. Two, the crossbow was in a secret area in the room, and secret weapons are in every single room just in case. This would not only be extremely convenient, but it can't be true because Rinny specifically went to a room to get and load her shotgun, and if this was the case, then she should have already had a loaded weapon by the time Bloon came in, so Bloon couldn't have caught her off guard or intimidated her with the empty gun. 3, the crossbow came out of her butt. This makes the most sense because where the heck else could it have come from? And why would a crossbow just randomly be in a room where corpses lay? With all these totally crappy and forced plot beats, you may be hoping that at least one other aspect of the show is good, and that may be the characterization. This arc's best aspect is a characterization since everyone's memorable and unique, especially Luny and Bloon, who have protagonist personalities you basically never see in horror shows. Even then, everyone's still pretty flawed, and I'll be going with the order of who dies first to who survived. So of course we'll be starting with Luny. Her being sadistic like Rinny as a reaction to what she went through is interesting, and I don't mind her being used in this way, but there are a few slightly annoying things about her. A big one I'm wondering about is why didn't she more thoroughly pat Rinny down to make sure she had no way to escape? And I think this should have happened because Rinny was already hiding a razor in her pocket. Luny confiscated this but didn't think to check for more. I think it makes sense to be more cautious when torturing an evil person who has access to alien technology. I can see someone saying that this being an oversight from Luny is fair because where the hell did Rinny even get the second razor? Was it in her fur or something? Wouldn't that cut her? The other annoying thing is again the crossbow problem, but why didn't Luny incapacitate Rinny so there'd be no way for her to escape? She came across as more careless than anything, and I sort of get it since Luny's not a sadistic torturer like Rinny, but it still feels annoying because these solutions that could have saved them feel obvious. Because of these things, her death felt unfair, but to me, she was someone that needed to die since there's not much you can do with her, and besides the timing of it was good. Copper plus Bloon. It might seem strange to bundle these two into one section, but this is because despite being practically opposites, they have extremely similar plot contrivant related issues. First with Copper. He's not bad per se, but there's more bad with him than good. He's shown to care a lot about lawful justice and not taking the law into his own hands, as we learned from episode 2 from his and Bloon's disagreement about what they should do about Rinny. It's framed in a way that signals that we're supposed to understand both sides, but the problem is that Copper's belief that they shouldn't kill Rinny is weak due to it being based on purely ungrounded principles. A principled belief in something that has no ground simply makes no sense, and it's impossible to root for a position like that because it comes from nothing. If Copper said that he had a lot of law enforcement helping him in his life, or if he went through a close person in his life or something becoming better after being horrible, then this could have strengthened his position emotionally, so we could at least see where he's coming from. This isn't the case though, and Bloon in the Just Free Her scene, where he says the least harm that they could do to her would be freeing her, though he'd be the cause of other people's deaths in that circumstance, the fact that they were tortured at most hours ago, and the fact that he basically concedes is what immediately destroys any chance at us sympathizing with him, though he doesn't really concede. Instead, he stays extremely consistent with his character throughout the series, and while that'd be a good thing in most stories, it's just not here, and it's partially why everyone dies. His consistency given the situation makes no sense, and any normal character, especially in the Rinny shotgun scene, would obviously kill the person who's trying to kill them despite their principles. It's just annoying because why would Copper hold back at all? Because he himself previously in episode 2 said that his electricity is strong enough to kill somebody, but he doesn't kill Rinny for some reason. He also hesitates to shock Elma. He's the reason why they had no ammo in the AK-47 in the first place, and if you want, you can even blame Luny's death on Copper bugging her about not going back into Rinny's torture room, since him distracting her is what got her killed. For clarification's sake, I'm saying that here this is why Copper is unlikable and extremely difficult to root for or care about. A similar story is true for Bloon, despite him being basically the opposite from Copper. He's hyper-logical, almost emotionless, calm and intelligent, which is unique for this genre. Though this is only in episode 2, as by episode 3, his calmness is shattered when he sees Luny get shot by a crossbow and when he learns that Copper emptied the bullets out of the AK-47. I get that he'd freak out, but by episode 4, the guy snaps at Copper, which is just out of character, since we saw how Bloon gets when he's stressed, mad, or annoyed in episode 2 with the Just Free Her scene. He's also extremely out of character in the whole shotgun fight scene, since it was dumb for Bloon to get into grabbing distance of Rinny instead of maybe hitting her or something and then telling Copper to shock her, because Bloon just isn't dumb or impulsive. Plus, where'd this weird sadistic side of him come from? It makes me feel like this Bloon would have been with Luny torturing Rinny to death as opposed to the more calm and measured Bloon of episode 2. I could see someone saying that these are just Bloon's true colors or something like that, but I don't agree because this was not foreshadowed at all, and this literally came out of basically nowhere. This was a weird reaction to an understandable buildup of crap that Copper has been doing, but it just doesn't feel like Bloon would react in this way due to how he reacted to things in the past. It's just not consistent at all, and also him acting stupid later also makes this kind of defense a little weak. Similarly to Copper, this is for plot contrivance sake so that Bloon could basically lead Copper and him to their deaths, but instead of absurd, nonsensical levels of consistency, it's Bloon bending out of shape to move the story forward. Opposite issues, yet the same results. Also similarly to Copper, he does things that don't make sense given who he is. Bloon obviously isn't against killing anyone, so why in episode 3 did he not try to go kill Rinny when Luny came into the room with them to eat? How didn't Bloon see and grab the machete on the wall before Elma, even though Bloon is really smart? I think I went over enough examples, and now I want to talk about Carl. Carl's the most boring, and when I initially wrote this script, I forgot to make him a section. Put simply, Carl's a coward of the group, and he's a doctor. This detail is only necessary so that he could identify the kind of gas Luny was attacked by when she was shot with a crossbow. I don't know why a doctor would know what nerve gas in the air looks like, but this guy just does, I guess. For the most part, he does nothing, and with the terrible power of just blowing bubbles, he only really had potential. Though the author squanders his chance to maybe grow or create a longer story out of this, since in episode 4 he's killed by Elma right after the ridiculously forced dry firing shotgun scene. I think it'd be more satisfying if he, the babied coward, was the only normal one to escape, and there could have been some creative directions as to where he could take it. Maybe Rinny knows he's alive and tries to get the weird organizations he's with on him, or maybe she doesn't and Carl develops skills and begins stalking Rinny so he himself can kill her and get vengeance for what happened. Him dying because Elma was inexplicably in a cupboard seriously sucks, and then him being fully killed by those military operatives from Last Note just makes his death dishonorable, as he gets no chance to become a fuller, more complex and fleshed out character. Elma's okay. I don't feel much for her since it felt like the author made the story with the end of where she'd be in mind, and that idea was gonna happen no matter what. She has some great moments like when she killed the military operatives that were on Rinny's side in Last Note, but then there are just weird ones like the self-harming scene that just felt unnecessary. Even if you could maybe argue that it was foreshadowing for when she'd attempt to take her own life in the special, we still didn't need it because we see Elma being mentally ill, and that's enough for us to understand that she probably would do something like that. Her power also makes no sense. Could she not activate it by will? Does it activate when she's angry? Why didn't it activate while she's being tortured by Rinny? And is Elma even still herself when it's active? I don't get it because there are moments like the whole Carl death scene where she just jumped out and murdered him like a monster, but then there are other moments where she can articulate the fact that she'd rather not team up with Puz because he worked with Rinny. It's kind of like she's semi-beast mode rather than being fully a monster, but this is further confused because in the special she attacks Yulu without realizing it. So does that mean that a lot of her previous attacks were unconscious and automatic to her despite the few clearly conscious moments? And besides, a lot of what made her the way she is due to plot contrivance. She shouldn't have ever gotten the machete on the wall since it doesn't make sense for either Bloon or Copper to not have seen it, because Bloon's smart and he probably would have scanned his environment. And Copper should have kept up the lies since he's not characterized to be an idiot. Her not being able to kill Rinny in their brief scuffle doesn't add up due to her speed and power as we see from her killing the military folks. Rinny's the worst character, even though she's consistent. Her insane plot armor keeps her from dying in many circumstances within this arc in just the first 3 episodes. I've already talked about how Bloon should have checked on her to make sure she was dead by either making a deal with Luny or simply going in and finishing her off, and of course the crossbow moment, but I'll focus on 2 examples of this character having stupid plot armor that are undeniable. One's the shotgun fight in episode 4. Bloon heard and saw Rinny reloading her shotgun, but the plot protected Rinny by not having Bloon cock the shotgun before attempting to shoot her, even though he saw that she never cocked it and that she was in the middle of reloading it. This is what saved Rinny, and this is 20 seconds after she was shocked with the lightning that should have killed her, assuming Copper did use a full power blast, since his demonstration and this are very different. How'd she even get up that quickly? The second is Rinny flying the helicopter. Ignoring the fact that Rinny would just not have the time in the day to learn how to do this, while also partaking in her hobby and socializing and building a house in the Arctic and cultivating ties with an odd organization and presumably evading law enforcement daily, and also apparently being 19 years old according to the first Prettyblood episode, which by the way makes it questionable that she had a kid at that point. How is she also so good that she's able to do it with shots in her chest and ear? The worst part is that she's not even interesting. She's just another purely evil for no reason, sadistic but cowardly villain, and sometimes no reason works, but most of the time a reason makes it creepier. Am from I Have No Mouth and Much Green, for example, is a genocidal AI program, and he's scary because of his backstory, which feels extremely realistic, and it allows for us to realize that there's no forgiving or changing this creature. All Rinny has is that when she was 4, she hit a cat on the head with a bat. That's literally it. It doesn't even make sense because it's just absurd, and because no matter what, she probably should have been on some heavy surveillance. It also makes me question, seriously, how don't the cops know about her? She's literally been killing things since she was a toddler. How'd nobody note this? Rinny's not interesting, the plot bends and cracks unnaturally to protect her, and she feels like an author self-insert so he can live out the fantasy of torturing little animal kids since he has a sickness in his head. Episode analysis. I know that last part was pretty harsh, but seriously, a lot of this show is just animal kids being tortured, and you know the guy who made it is... yeah. Still, I have a few good things to say about the show when it comes to a few of the episodes, and still a few bad things. I'll choose 2 of the best episodes from Red Snow and 2 of the worst, and then analyze them so this doesn't just feel like I'm hating on a fellow single creator. Best episodes. Episode 2. This is the best episode in the arc due to its great quality characterization, and there's only one real flaw, that being when Bloon asks everyone to just say who they are. This doesn't make any sense because Bloon soon after says that he won't try to remember them, meaning that he doesn't really care about any of the info they could have gave him, making it contrived and unnecessary, as before this point, LDT was showing who the characters were by how they spoke and what they were doing. Outside of that, we gain info about who each of the characters are through their argument about what to do with Rinny. We see Copper's more principle-based arguments as for why they shouldn't kill Rinny and how they should let the police deal with her, and with this we learn that Copper's not weak, which is further shown by the fact that he aimed the AK at Luny, but instead he's a person that takes lawful justice extremely seriously. In the argument, we have another person representing Copper's side, but more passively since they're weakling, Carl. He mostly agrees with Copper not out of shared principles, but because he's more empathetic and would rather nobody get hurt despite what he went through. Though, since he's weak and cowardly, he's not as willing to act on what he believes as Copper is. Bloon and Luny are the opposite side of the argument, with him being the logic and her being the emotion, as he prioritizes logic more than anyone else, and believes that Rinny should die as soon as possible since she's a threat. Everything he says is purely based on what makes sense, and because of this, he controls the conversation as he doesn't get emotional at all, unlike the others. While Luny agrees, but how she reacts is opposite to Bloon. She believes they should kill Rinny, but she's overly emotional and wants to kill her slowly due to what Rinny did to all of them, which is what starts the chain of failures that results in all of their deaths. The main ones arguing are Copper and Bloon, and they ideologically clash because they simply see the situation differently. The biggest thing to note is that Copper's more willing to act on what he believes, but Bloon isn't, as he'd rather stick to explaining why he thinks a certain way. This clearly shows us that unlike Copper, Bloon would rather simply argue his case and attempt to persuade the others purely through logic to not get himself in possible danger, since he, as he said, prioritizes himself over the others and presumably wouldn't do anything to put himself into a compromising position. He sees himself as far safer simply making arguments rather than Copper, though this aspect of his character dissipates by episode 3 and 4. Within this argument, we get the best scene by far, that being the then free her one. It's where Bloon gets clearly annoyed by Copper's viewpoint, so he breaks it down by saying that if he truly wants Rinny to go through no pain, then they should free her, though if she hurts anyone else, it'd be his fault. This scene's actually chilling and highly memorable because of how cold but obviously correct Bloon is, especially when he compares the alternative of just leaving her here tied up to what Luny wants to do. The best part is that Copper doesn't really respond to it, and what could have made it better would be if he responded in shock and stuttered while thinking of something to say, though it ends in silence, and then would transition into what originally happened. And of course, maybe Copper actually changing his viewpoint. Elma's the least used character here, but she's still alright. We see that she's obviously unstable thanks to her reaction to Copper trying to talk to her, though her being in the butt slapper 9000 for a split second wasn't necessary, and it kinda ruined the mood. Overall, this episode is alright, and while the characters don't really follow the personalities shown in this episode very well, by itself it functions as a solid showcase of who these characters are. In a good cartoon, this would probably be a 5 out of 10 or 5.5 out of 10 episode in my opinion, since it still has some flaws, and really is not great per se, but it doesn't do too much wrong, and for Prettyblood, it's practically perfection. Episode 6. Last Note is only here because it was simple action, which was well animated and fun to watch. It was an odd tonal shift for sure, and Rinny escaping felt like garbage, though the setup for Elma's special was great. Honestly, there's not much to say about episode 6 since it's just a simple, action-packed slaughterfest for Elma that shows that Elma's extremely powerful, though we already knew that. Worst episodes. Episode 1. It would have made more sense for episode 1 to show us the relationships Rinny had with the main characters, and to show us how they even got in their predicament before they then tie Rinny up. Though what we get is 6 minutes of torture. It's obvious this episode was made just to indulge in the author's odd fixation, especially with scenes of Luny choking for like 30 seconds with very minimal animation, and the weirdly drawn out scene of some random bunny character's neck being slashed, and Luny being forced to drink his blood. Outside of the unintentionally hilarious moment of Rinny in a UFO shooting a character with a freaking dart gun, and then us seeing the hyper-realistic man face Rinny makes, which just made me laugh out loud. I'm laughing thinking about it. It's just hard to watch and gross. The only purpose of this episode narratively is to let the audience know that Rinny's a sadistic killer, but again, this could have been done better in ways I already suggested. Episode 4, Shotgun is your best friend. This and episode 3 were close, but I think 4 is worse due to the more aggressive, blatant character assassination for Bloon, Carl's stupid death, Rinny's blatant plot armor, and the weird 1-minute suffocation scene. I practically covered this entire episode through previous parts, though there's one good thing about this episode. When Copper and Carl make electric bubbles, Bloon coldly tells Carl to use them in case he and Copper die while they're trying to get ammo. It's actually chilling because of Bloon's cold delivery and seemingly his resignation with life, as if he's fine with dying. What adds on to this is when Carl says, "Why would you say that?" and he just says, "Why not? Just do what I told you and take care of yourself." It feels heavy, especially on a second watch after knowing that they do indeed die, even if it felt like they'd survive and get out of their horrible situation. This scene could have been honored better if their deaths weren't so drawn out and obviously fetishy, like maybe if Rinny just shot them in the head with a shotgun, but the scene alone was solid. Outside of that, this episode is terrible. Red Snow conclusion. Red Snow just isn't very good. Rarely it has some good moments, but the second you start asking questions, the story crumbles under its own weight. And this is what's seen as the best of the best for Prettyblood due to its popularity and coverage online. I think that if this arc was completely different and focused more on being disturbing, it could have been far better. Similarly to my previous video with the abridged parody, I created a short animation for what I think could have been a better direction for the story in basically every way. I put a nice amount of work into it, I really like it, and I call it Blood's Pretty Dark Fantasy. It's more of a retake on Prettyblood in general based off of what I think could have been a better direction. Give me your thoughts in the comments. It also has no voice acting, so if you're interested in watching it, then you have to look at the screen and read what's said. What'd you think? Better or worse than Red Snow? Definitely give me your opinion, since I wanted to go for something more grounded while relying mostly on dialogue, timing, and audio choices as opposed to the animation in order to show that art stylistic limitations can be overcome via other means. Anyway, on to the newest series in Pretty Blood that's actually pretty good, that being Bunchy Prison. When I first made the script, Bunchy Prison wasn't done yet. Now that it is, I can say that it's not only a massive step up from everything before it, but it's actually really good despite the anticlimactic and odd ending. Positive overview. Outside of characterization and attempts to be disturbing, Bunchy Prison beats Red Snow completely. The animation, sound design, pacing, and tonal control, be it comedic or serious, is just way better outside of a few occasional moments. The microphone is still bad, but with normal audio balancing and no actual voice work, it never takes away from the experience like how Kim's baby voice in Red Snow did. Which I didn't really mention, but Kim is a veteran and he sounds like a freaking baby. It's just hilarious, man. The text placement is unorthodox since it just appears wherever it wants to at any size, though it's well implemented. It's never sudden, the words never blend into the background, and they come out like live captions, while also giving you ample time to read what's said, which makes the random placements easy to track. Unlike everything else in Pretty Blood, Bunchy Prison's mostly trying to be funny, and I'd say it excels at this. Episode 3 is just hilarious due to the interaction between Bunchy and Rashina, or Rashina, I don't know how you're supposed to, Rachina? Who cares? My favorite joke was the "your height looks shorter than usual" one because of the timing of when Bunchy said, "What the F is she talking about?" It works because Bunchy's insane and not a normal person, making his grounded reaction unexpected due to the juxtaposition of who he is and the reaction, and relatable since we'd be thinking the same thing in this instance. Episode 1's mostly comedic, though it doesn't work as well as 3. I still enjoyed the scene where Bunchy was talking to his fellow inmates who did crimes that weren't nearly on the same level as his, and I think that Muffin was by far the most charming one to watch through that whole interaction. Bunchy Prison is actually good outside of episode 2 and a few other aspects that I thought were weak or could be better implemented. Weak points. This arc wastes our time frequently, and episode 1 is a good example. Since episode 3 is apparently the end, the intro of everyone in episode 1 and the odd introduction of Zoe just doesn't matter. We never see Zoe again, and we never see characters like Muffin again either, because by episode 3, Bunchy already escapes the prison. In episode 2, we also see Black and learn about who he is, and the whole interaction between him and Bunchy works outside of the fact that it's also pointless. Unless we're going to learn more about Black and what he did to the Pretty Blood organization through flashbacks, or if someone wants to avenge his death for example, then really all we do with the entirety of episode 2 is learn that there are people who don't like the Pretty Blood organization and that Bunchy's sadistic and evil. Two things that were already known due to the technical series, Bunchy's statements within Bunchy Prison, and what he did to Rinny's daughter in Pretty Blood's first episode. Black's death is also the only violent scene in the whole of Bunchy Prison, and it was working well without violence, so to me it felt like the author felt like he had to add at least some violence since this is still Pretty Blood, despite it being unnecessary. I also feel the same about when Bunchy fell into the hole and got stuck. Do we really need to see him getting bitten up by bugs? Or functionally, could this have worked the exact same if he just slid right down into the unknown area? Obviously, the second of the two is true. Bunchy Prison's few attempts at being disturbing always fall flat in their face. The first one with Zoe looking at Bunchy with the music cutting out feels more like a Ren and Stimpy joke as opposed to something that creeped me out because of the art style shift. To me, it's the funniest joke in the entire episode, despite it obviously not intending to be one. The second one with Bunchy falling into the hole and getting bitten up by the bugs, like I said earlier, adds nothing but a superficial level of disturbance. Yes, it's uncomfortable to watch someone get bitten up by bugs, but it just doesn't stick with you. Third is Black's death, which is just drawn out and overly gory for no good narrative reason. It's again disturbing on a superficial level. Because of its abrupt, anticlimactic end at episode 3, the arc is confusing in quite a few ways. 1. Who even is Zoe and why is he telling outside info to low-level criminals? Since this prison holds both people who do petty crimes like graffiti and child killers like Bunchy, you think that maybe Zoe would rather give free info to people like that to save his own skin, right? Or at least you think that these low-level guys are paying him. We also end with a lot of questions unanswered, like what even is the underground area? According to what Rashina says, you think this is a different planet or something and not just the underground to a prison, since she says she remembers her master being busy on Earth. Does this unknown testing happen only to prisoners in this prison, or is it worldwide? Is this connected to the Pretty Blood Company, or is it connected to the rabbit robot from Space Blubby, or neither? And also, why is the Master's armor station just out in the open? The last question is just plot convenience, since the author wanted Bunchy in the armor to progress the plot, but couldn't or didn't exactly think of a way of him getting it that makes sense, but those other questions feel like things that are being set up so they can be answered later. If episode 3 is really just the end and we never hear from Ranchina or this underground area again in future arcs, then these questions just become disappointing points in the series. Bunchy Prison conclusion. It's pretty good, especially episode 3. It's just a bit flawed, and despite the weak points, I still enjoyed myself while watching it. I'd say it was the best arc in ALL of Prettyblood by far, and in the future I'm hoping for some kind of next series follow-up or something, since there are still a few unanswered elements. I can't say the same for the other animations, though. I've talked about this previously, but what makes Prettyblood so confusing is the fact that outside of the straight arcs, it's impossible to tell what's canon. On YouTube, the author created a playlist named Prettyblood, but that doesn't have all the episodes because they deleted a few of them or they just never uploaded them from Newgrounds. And with Newgrounds, the author seemingly can't even make a playlist. Sure, every episode of Prettyblood is there, but what's actually part of the story? I've decided to go with what the wiki says and what's available on YouTube. Quite frankly, I dislike this show so much purely because of these other animations for a few simple reasons. Mostly just torture. Dream Terror, Rinny, Space Blubby, the twins, Necroworms, and the starter all have one thing in common. They're all made to satisfy the author's hyper-unorthodox fetish. That's it. I seriously mean it too. At most, with episodes like Dream Terror or Space Blubby, we get a little setup to the main event, that being the torture of usually a child character, and then the majority afterwards is just watching it happen. These episodes are so bad because they clearly were made to satisfy what the creator is into, and if you just started off with Red Snow, you'd be completely fine. I assume that this is why Little Deadly Things took down or never uploaded a lot of these videos to YouTube, since not only are they gross, but completely useless. There's nothing good that can be derived from watching these episodes. At least Bunchy Prison and the Elma special have promising starts. Red Snow told a story, and Technical tried to be funny and surprising. The only way you can enjoy these episodes is if you're into the same thing as Little Deadly Thing, since from all perspectives these episodes fail. Horror-wise, even if you found the crudely drawn torture scary, after the third episode you get tired, grossed out, and eventually feel nothing. As I said, it adds nothing to the story, since if we saw a fourth of what Rinny did to her daughter, we'd understand that Rinny is bad. Sometimes showing us something over and over can work, like in Baki. The Pickle Saga shows us constantly that Pickle is a caveman. We get flashbacks, we're shown his odd behavior, and we see that because of the time period he's from, that he can't possibly integrate into modern society. But it's fine because each scene adds new information or strengthens it, and the arc centers around understanding Pickle due to him being so different from everyone else in the show. With each torture scene, we don't learn something new about Rinny, and especially for ones like Dream Terror and Space Blubby, we gain nothing useful. With Necroworms, they at least get used in Technical, but in others, some aliens get attacked brutally by a robot in Space Blubby, and in Dream Terror, some mentally ill freak who thinks his Kira from Death Note tortures people. So what? Dream Terror came out in 2017, literally 8 years ago, and we never see this Kira wannabe again. While Space Blubby came out 7 years ago, and we only ever see this robot in a short extras animation and a short called Malfunctioning from a year ago. In that time, the Elma special and Bunchy Prison arc started, so we're probably not getting any more of that. The only one that's somewhat useful is Rinny, since it's important for knowing who Bunchy is later in Bunchy Prison, but to enjoy and understand that arc, you still don't really need to watch it. I feel like I've got to mention at least once, since the boxing videos are some of the most popular on Little Deadly Things channel, but they also fall under this category. They're not canon, and though the animation is better than usual, they're all fully pointless to the story and to some extent probably also get the author off just like his other torture videos. Conclusion. The other Prettyblood animations Little Deadly Things made are either useless or have nothing to do with the rest of the story. As for the final thing I have to review, it's easily the worst part of the story due to its age, that being Technical. I left this for the last to review for a few reasons. One is that Technical is Prettyblood's first and oldest arc, and it's not as well known as Red Snow. Second is that Technical, if you include the non-canon episodes like A Man in the Depth of Hell or Underground Rating, is longer than Red Snow, with Red Snow being an hour long and Technical being an hour and 54 minutes, nearly 2 hours. And even if you just have the canon episodes, it's still an hour and 13 minutes. The third reason is because Technical is just mind-numbingly boring and genuinely a painful drudge to get through, mainly because of the random dated humor. In the late 2000s and early 2010s, random humor was a staple in what people found funny, especially kids. Things like the awesome face, derpy facial expressions, or the troll face accompanied with the Tralala song, and the phrases like XD or LOLOLOL were unavoidable because it was universal internet culture at the time. The ASDF movies are a good example of what we found funny at the time, since this was a monumentally popular internet series, and I'd say that it's probably still well known due to its legacy, even though it certainly doesn't stand up nowadays, since outside of a very few funny jokes like the pie flavor, I got older, or Doctor, I think I might be homosexual ones, most of them just have a nonsense punchline or are ruined by a nonsense punchline, making the whole show have an extremely high miss to hit ratio comedically. This is because the old internet random equal funny approach to humor fails outside of entertaining children and occasional use due to it being completely nonsensical. A child wouldn't think about if a joke makes sense, they'd just see, "Hey Joey, do you want to eat me?" and then laugh because a muffin says that they wanted to die. Similarly, a child would also see Sandy Ben get shot and replaced for no reason by Sentry with epic music and laugh because it's random and for no other reason. Technical has its primarily old, outdated form of humor over and over, and it doesn't make sense because this came out in 2020. Why does Sandy have an awesome face? In 2020, that was an extremely dead meme at the time, and Little Deadly Things was only like 11 when this meme was even a thing. Or the one where Sandy randomly sits in a chair and plays a video game, which is sort of funny at first, but it gets dragged out for basically the remainder of the series. Or the intro where Sandy has bunny ears for no reason. Or the whole thing with Sandy looking adorable or normal, I guess, and being godlike or whatever for randomness sake. Most of the humor is like this, and I can't think of any jokes from the series that were funny except for the one in Inhuman where Sandy kisses Altha, which is one of the only funny jokes due to the absurdity. Unlike serious moments where if those fail, then it's possible to still be entertained by the attempt in an ironic sense or still respect what was being gone for, despite the failure, jokes failing is nothing but annoying. About jokes, the main character Sandy Ben is a poorly written gag character. I have nothing against gag characters if they make sense. By that, I mean a character that has one gimmick that's totally wild for the otherwise serious show they're in, or a character where the whole point is that they have some kind of funny attribute that changes things. One Punch Man's a good example of a solid gag character, since the whole point of the show is that he's by far the strongest being in the entire multiverse, and for most of it he's just trying to find a good fight. It also helps that the show doesn't fully revolve around him, even though he's the main character. Or Psyche from Psyche K, since the recurring joke of the show is that he can read people's minds and do insane things with his psychic abilities. Both these are fine within their own worlds for different reasons. Since One Punch Man is generally more serious, the explanation of Saitama doing 100 push-ups, sit-ups, and squats every day for him to be the strongest is just funny and unbelievable to everyone who asks him how he got there, which is comedic via absurdity. And for Saki K's case, since Saki K is purely a comedy, him just being born inexplicably with these powers is fine because we're not supposed to take this world as seriously as One Punch Man. It also helps that both of these stories stay consistent within what was established, like how Saitama doesn't suddenly have the ability to control the wind or fly, or how Psyche, well, part of that show is that Psyche can do basically anything, but that's established throughout the series consistently so we're never blindsided. Technical just has Sandy Ben being this super oddly powerful being for no reason who pulls powers and abilities out of nowhere, and most of the time it doesn't even make sense. It's also trying to be more serious and comedic, meaning that we're supposed to take this world more seriously than something like Psyche K's. So having no explanation hurts him as a gag character. He just for no sensible reason has all these drones. There's no sensible reason for him having an infinitely large pocket on his jacket like Uncle Grandpa. He has no sensible reason for being able to easily infiltrate this probably million or billion dollar level criminal organization, and for no sensible reason he has people hired that can do his bidding. And he also can just use gas to make the Molinos really strong for yet again no sensible reason. None of it even has a basis in what was established previously because nothing was even established. And without any foundation, it feels like weird punchline after weird punchline, like a joke I'm not in on despite watching the entire series. As for not making sense, that gets into a few of the show's biggest issues like the over explanations, poor ESL skills, and weird world building. Most of Technical is just characters explaining things because nothing makes sense. Explanations still don't help because they themselves make no sense, and a lot of them come from characters we shouldn't care about. Again, Baki is halfway known for its long explanations, but they always add to the story by helping us get in the head of the characters and explaining the insane techniques they do. Explanations are what make Baki such a unique show, since a guy can do something insane like turning his arm into a spring to fight a caveman, but the show will explain it to you in a way that somehow makes sense, which is inherently humorous because in reality it's always nonsense. They're also not boring due to their inherent absurdity, and because Baki's whole point as a show centers around the characters' wacky techniques, so we're watching the show in the first place to see some crazy martial arts. In episode 1 of Technical, we mostly just get explanations of how things are working and what the characters are thinking, and finally, 14 minutes into the 18-minute episode, we get something else. A backstory about the Molinos, which are little animals like Rinny. They're also boring because we don't know any of these characters and they affect nothing. Explanations also give us no useful new information. In episode 1 where Sandy was shot and then replaced by a sentry, the whole explanation afterwards where he says that every time they find and shoot him they'll get a sentry, that literally never happens again. Stupid crap like this would have been better just not being explained, and the same is true for the hologram explanation. Sandy says that because he got some material from a meteor, which is from some other planet, the material makes holograms function under a different form of logic than Earth's logic. Ignoring the fact that this material never ever shows up again in anything else, what the hell does that even entail when logic is just a property of existence? I understand that learning new languages is difficult, but in technical, the ESL or English second language skills are just bad. And the text is too fast. What the hell does Lance mean in episode 1 when he says, "With this technique, it's very good at long term"? We see just wrong sentences all the time in this series, and some scenes just feel extremely weird due to the phrasing. Episode 3's Nono and Berdina scene stands out with Nono saying stuff like, "But you said like I ask you, do you love me?" I get that it's supposed to be a funny scene and why it's supposed to be funny, but the extra brain power needed to understand and process what's being said due to the broken phrasing is what hurts these extremely rare, otherwise alright jokes. I'm also not a fan of explanations about the Molinos themselves, since sometimes it's confusing and overall unnecessary. For example, the Molinos in episode 1, according to Lance, are said to be very peaceful, innocent, and childlike outside of extremely rare exceptions like Rinny. But in Red Snow, we learn that Kim is a war vet. I don't think this is a retcon, and it might not seem like much, but this puts into question a few things. Like, did the Molinos have some kind of war with each other? With modern military-grade guns? If that's the case, it messes with the idea of the species being innocent and childlike, because who caused the war? The extremely rare Molinos that are like Rinny that hardly exist? Maybe Kim was in a human and Molino war, but that was for one never stated, even though that'd be massive lore, and for two, the time between Sandy unintentionally introducing Molinos to human society and Molinos integrating can't have been that long, because in episode 3, Rinny looks the exact same as she does in all of her other adult appearances. If this was the past, it would have been easy to just draw kid or baby Rinny with their parents. So there really wouldn't have been any chance for this, and it's most likely that Kim participated in an actual Molino v Molino war or something. Prettyblood, the criminal company, having all these resources while being a massive underground operation that the police don't know about also feels like crap to me as well. The fact that the Molinos being slaughtered by the hundreds should definitely sound alarm bells to any police force anywhere they live, because Molinos already integrated with human society, and a lot of Molinos probably have plenty of human friends since they're so nice. Plus, you want me to believe that they're being paid enough to own an entire island, an amusement park, submarines, and a massive underground torture facility under the same island? Ignoring how the hell they even got the underground built without law enforcement or anyone noticing, I'm meant to believe that these guys get paid probably hundreds of millions, if not maybe billions, for simply torturing these little animals. Really? All it takes is a single person to come out of one of these events, feel bad afterwards, and then tell the police and it's over. Or hell, a spy from the government. But probably the most annoying fact about this series, aside from its length, has to be that it's generally unimportant. In the greater narrative of Prettyblood, especially for what's currently going on, this arc just isn't needed. After Prettyblood is destroyed by Sandy, Rinny is still able to call the very company for help. Sandy and Nono only appear again in Little Deadly Things 5000 sub special, while Sandy only appears a few more times in some non-canon episodes. And because all the bad guys in Technical either die or just leave, they'll obviously never come back. This is totally unlike Red Snow or even LDT's really early animations, because you need to watch Red Snow to understand the Elma special, and for Bunchy Prison to know who Bunchy was. You'd have to have watched the first episode of Prettyblood and Rinny. All Technical gives us is some confusing info about Molinos that's never relevant again. The reason why Technical isn't nearly as popular as Red Snow is because it's just worse. It's less interesting, its characters are far thinner and not even worth analyzing, and it fails at so much more. This is just the author's first attempt at writing something, and there's no reason to watch it. Final conclusion. Prettyblood is a series created by a guy who's into torturing Happy Tree Friends characters. That's how it started, but he wanted it to be more than that, and after a lot of mistakes writing-wise in arcs like Red Snow, Technical, or the smaller ones before it like Dream Terror and Space Blubby, 8 years later, we finally gotten to a point where things like Bunchy Prison and the Elma special came out and are really good. The best part of Prettyblood is that the author kept improving its work, since with success like this, it's easy to stagnate due to you already winning. I know I said some really blunt and possibly inflammatory stuff in this review. I mean, just look at the title, if it's still insane. But nonetheless, I wish for the continued success of Prettyblood, and I wish that in the future I could say the Elma special arc or Bunchy Prison arc part 2 was great. Keep going, Prettyblood, and I hope nothing but the best for the author. That still includes some kind of mental help for his fetish though. That's just not okay to have. So it's come to my attention. I checked Little Deadly Things post, and I thought this would be important to talk about. Just at least at the end of the video, because this is just a big thing that happened, so within the Prettyblood community at least. So Little Deadly Thing basically made a thing where he's clarifying first that he drew, and he did indeed draw NSFW. I certainly use this as like a screenshot for proof that he draws this freaky stuff, and that I don't even need the video evidence before. I could still show it, but I might still show it in the video, but I don't need it anymore. He literally admits to this. But more importantly, he said that there's some kind of predator kind of thing going on in his Discord server with some kind of creepy guy, and minors grooming or doxing happen in his server, it seems like. So He said, "I'm horrible at managing the server." Now, the question is, this is really fresh. I haven't really had that much time to think about it, but my immediate thoughts on this would be, I mean, this was just 4 hours ago, is what I mean by this is fresh. But my immediate thoughts on this is that I don't think that he deserves that much hate, but this is definitely still really bad because it's still not his fault. You know, managing a Discord server is pretty freaking annoying, and especially if two people are DMing, then you can't really tell. If I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt, you can't really tell what's going on if two people are DMing. But one thing that was completely in his control is the fact that he allowed for NSFW into a server, which is always going to be a bad idea. In every Discord server, there's bound to be at least like one kid or something. And besides, it's just weird to talk about sexual stuff on a Discord server. I mean, you're talking to these weird freaky gremlins that you've never seen in your life before about, like, I don't know, in this context, probably gooning to animal kids being tortured and being put in butt slappers. Butt slapper 9000s like Elma. But seriously though, I don't get the appeal of putting NSFW in a public Discord server, especially when there could be kids there. So that's definitely his fault. I don't know the Discord politics, of course. I'm technically not even in the Prettyblood community at all. I just make videos on what you guys want me to review, but I thought this was important to mention because a kid got hurt in his Discord server, which isn't directly his fault. And it's kind of impossible to stop things like that from happening, but it is more easy to prevent, especially if you don't allow NSFW into your server, which is a stupid decision. It's retarded. One thing though is that he says, "Yes, I did draw NSFW of BDSM and rape. I apologize sincerely." I mean, this guy's a total freak. I think he'd benefit from electroshock therapy. I'm not gonna lie. You know, electroshock therapy. Okay, I'm being facetious. Electroshock therapy is kind of crazy. Oh my gosh, I'm imagining a little deadly thing like strapped them to an electric chair or something, getting shocked. It's like, "No, I don't like BDSM or rape anymore. No, I don't go into that material anymore. No, I don't." And he's getting shocked over and over. I'm sorry. This is serious. I'm sorry, but yeah, you know, this is a bad situation overall. That's why I'm making a few jokes about it. But yeah, do what you will with this information. You know, I'm still gonna hope the best for Prettyblood, and nothing in the review will actually change. But one thing I just don't believe in his thing is that he says that old Prettyblood is not a fetish. Prettyblood is not a fetish. I don't believe that, because there are whole episodes of characters just being tortured in oddly unique and specific ways that are too consistent to not be a fetish. If it was disturbing, why not make new ways to disturb people instead of like putting bunny characters in butt slapper 9000s and having them drink their own throw up and all this other disgusting weird shit that you keep putting in your shows? The consistency is what still makes it a fetish, and it's clear to me that this just isn't completely true. So I personally think that based off of this post, Little Deadly Thing should have just admitted that old Prettyblood was basically all goon material, because it obviously is goon material. It just would have made way more sense if he did that, and that kind of makes me question his ability to be like a narrator or like say things, or it makes me question his believability, if that makes sense. But that's pretty much all I have to say on this. I personally am probably not going to watch Prettyblood again. One, because it sucks, and two, because I'm just not that interested in it. I'm more interested in Terrible Mouse, I'm gonna be honest. Especially because Prettyblood is just, there's so much worse with it. It's 5 years old. The majority of it is garbage, and it only started getting good with Bunchy Prison. Bunchy Prison, I guess, is the only thing I would stick around for, but with this happening, I don't know, man. Again, it wasn't his fault. It's not like he was a predator, like going after kids or something. He just had a poor job managing the server, and I think that's okay, but it's not okay at the same time, because it's annoying. It's more annoying. It's not hard, but it's more so annoying to manage the Discord server, and it's impossible to know the DMs of people. But maybe just keep NSFW out of your server, man. I don't know. That was probably a stupid decision, especially given your art style. You're obviously gonna attract kids no matter what your content is. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say and give you that information, you know. So yeah, in the name of Father, Son, Holy Spirit, you know, I pray for you, I bless you, and yeah, in the name of Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Oh yeah, go get in the gym. I don't know if you need to hear this. Lock in, get in the gym, get your health up. It's really not that hard. Just if you just need to hear this, you know. And yeah, watch my previous video, the Terrible Mouse one. I put a lot of work into that one. Also, it gives me money. I'd appreciate it. And you can become a member if you want. So do that if you want to see videos really early, or if you just want to see videos other people can never see. So anyway, goodbye everyone.